Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast. We made the mistake of trusting the Tories, and I tell you what, Chris, we ain't going to be making that mistake again.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guests, gossip and stories from the heart of GB News Studio here in Westminster. It felt to me that this week has been the moment, the week when politics finally got underway, with the budget setting out Labour's plans for the next 5 years, the start of this government's narrative for me, and the Tory party finally selecting a new leader in Kemi Badenoch. And overnight, the election of, unbelievably for many people, Donald Trump as the US president for the next 4 years. Back to the UK though, Labour's big sell from last week's budget was growth, but critics are worried that it'll be stifled by Rachel Reeves's £40 billion tax increase. Labour MPs are keen to rebut this, and with me now is a new Labour MP for Milton Keynes North, Chris Curtis, the Vice Chair of the new Labour Growth Group. Chris Curtis, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I love your energy behind the coming up line there. It's the best we've ever had in all of the 30 episodes of this podcast. And you're at bed at 3 a.m. last night because you're doing what?
I was watching the results come in from the US presidential election.
So we're waking up now. As things stand, we haven't got a clear victory quite for Donald Trump, but almost certainly by the time this comes out on Friday, it will be confirmed. What should the left's response be to a Trump win?
Well, the first thing to say is that for Britain, nothing changes. The special relationship runs so much deeper than one candidate. We will continue to work with the US on that.
And we've heard from Keir Starmer on that already. Yeah. I mean, any PM of the UK will hide behind that correctly because that matters. That's a deep security relationship. But the politics of Trump is so against what Labour stands for half the time.
Well, I mean, there's many issues in which we disagree with him. I'm sure, but look. The biggest reason that people get caught up quite often in like a lot of the culture war battles, a lot of those disagreements, but actually the most important thing to almost all voters in the world, and the political science shows this, is the money going into their pockets. And people in a lot of the West in recent years just do not feel like they don't see their economic situation improving. They can't see a world in which their kids are going to have a better future than they had themselves. And we need an answer, a sort of social democratic left-wing answer to that. And, we formed the Labour Growth Group, which we'll talk about in a bit, hopefully, partly for this reason, because we know that growing the economy, putting more money into people's pay packets, ensuring people that have ensuring people have that economic security in order to, thrive and reach their potential in life is so important.
Well, we'll come to that. And I think Labour's win, the huge majority your party and you personally won back in July, was fueled by people not feeling better off under the Tory party. They feel worse off for 14 years.
The last parliament
hasn't helped them.
The last parliament is one of the worst parliaments we've had in history for living standards. So there's reasons for that, and there's justifications for that. But ultimately, that's the biggest thing.
So there's common cause then with Trump's message on that point. Do you feel better off or not?
Ultimately, that is the argument on which almost all elections are fought and won, and the left has to remember that. And we need to not constantly get distracted, and we're going to have it in the UK in the coming years. We need to not constantly get distracted by whatever the newspapers are covering this week or whatever culture war battle we're having. We have to remember that putting more money into people's pockets is the most important one of the most important roles of government, alongside keeping.
I'm always saying to people, look at what Trump has done. Ignore the language. Some of it is horrific. Some of it is very difficult to justify to a father of daughters, and the rest of it is not appropriate for anyone to say that in public life. But look what he's done for people. And that's how he's being judged on in America. Maybe that's how Keir Starmer will be. We'll come to that in a second, but Keir Starmer will be judged here too.
Well, look, Trump was... I don't necessarily think that Trump had a particularly fantastic economic record when he was in power either, but he had a score of +8 on the economy. He was ahead of Cameron on the economy. I was posted before I did this, and usually the person that's ahead on the economy wins in elections because that's the person that people think is going to be better at getting money into their pay packets. And
this is why growth matters so much. Just before we come to the Labour Growth Group and the like, do you think that some of your colleagues need to say sorry online? David Lammy has been pretty brutal about Trump when he was a backbench MP. Keir Starmer said remarks. I mean, I'm the last British journalist to ask a question of Donald Trump because I asked him a question in Trump Tower in September. I asked him what he thought about Keir Starmer and he said some nice remarks. He was meeting his arm that night, and he said he's a very nice guy. He had a great race, did very well. He's very popular. So number 10 kind of owe me one for getting that on the record for Trump, given that's all we know on what he thinks of him. Should other of your colleagues have a bit of a that was then, this is now moment?
Yeah, we've all said things in life that we regret.
Well, just wipe the slate clean, say sorry, move on.
The most important thing is we need to continue to work with whoever sits in that big Oval Office there in Washington, and we will continue to do so.
So an apology from David Lammy?
It's not about an apology. It's about making sure that we continue to work together and continue that special relationship with our one of our most important allies.
Growth was a message of you and your leader back in July. How can jacking up taxes by £40 billion help growth?
Well, I think you've got to look at the alternatives, right? So all of these economic questions, we've got to remember that there's trade-offs, and if you don't do one thing, you've got to do another thing. So we've got a £22 billion platform, we've got an NHS that doesn't work. We could ignore those problems, we could kick them down the road. That wouldn't be good for growth, because one of the reasons we're struggling on growth is on the NHS, because we have so many people not able to go out and work, stuck in sickness, stuck on NHS waiting lists. We need to close that down in order to get growth back into the economy. That's a big problem. But also, we've seen the consequences of not wrestling with getting your public finances in order. We saw that with the Liz Truss mini budget. So we did need to close down that black hole that was left to us by the last Tory government. So ignoring it wasn't a problem. We could have done it through spending cuts, but actually that wouldn't have been good for growth either.
Wouldn't have happened.
We could have done
unsellable to your base too.
It's not just unsellable to our base. It would have been disastrous for the economy. I mean, there's actually lots of bottlenecks that we see in our economy that are caused by the fact that our public services are under-resourced. So that's not an option that would have been good for growth. So there's no good options for growth here. But actually, increasing those taxes in a pro-growth fair way was the best option that we had.
We do hear, though, from businesses saying it will damage growth. James Dyson, the like, he's saying it. Others are saying it. They're saying it's going to, not least the IHT increase for farmers. That's one part of it. The NICS increase, national insurance increase for employers' contributions. They're going to lower growth, and the OBR says that anemic growth the next 5 years.
Well, just on that, I mean, again, it's much more pro-growth than any of the alternatives, and you have to test any policy in a budget against the alternatives.
Against austerity and alternative.
Against austerity, against carrying on with sort of Liz Truss ignoring the economics or allowing our NHS to continue to let the country down. They would have not been good for growth either. The OBR figures on growth are not great, and we have to acknowledge that. Like, the trajectory that we've been left on growth is really scary, and fixing that as a country has to be the most important mission. Now, there's many things that the OBR haven't looked at yet. I'm really focused on getting planning reform through.
Yeah.
I speak to businesses who tell me that they've got millions and millions of pounds that they want to be investing in the UK, building new stuff, varieties, depending on what industry they're in. They can't do it because they can't get it through planning.
And the OBR on that says that they don't think they'll go through. They say, we've been here before, reforms haven't worked. So what you're saying is if you can get planning reform, the OBR might give you a better upgrade on growth figures. Yeah,
I mean, the OBR are right to be cynical because for 14 years the Tories have come along and they're like, we're going to do planning reform because we know it's important to get the economy growing. Then they lose a by-election in Cheshire and Amersham, throw a strop and decide not to do it.
This is your problem now, though. You're Milton Keynes, you live in a rural area. I mean, people don't want building.
It's not that rural, but I take the point. But yes, no, absolutely. The problems we've had with economic growth are politicians, people that have sat in this chair before, had these conversations, have not been willing to front up the trade-offs facing this country to the people in our constituencies, and we can't afford to do that anymore.
What's the case you make? I think when I worked at the Telegraph for 20 years, so I know about this concern. It bothered our readers a lot there. I would say to politicians, isn't it a moral case?
Yeah.
You've got older people in big houses, their kids are living at home till they're in the mid-30s. Free up some space, stop objecting to things. Don't you want to make a moral case against NIMBYism?
It's absolutely a moral case, because we are robbing our children's future from them unless we get our economy growing again. We have, I've got 1,000 families living in temporary accommodation in Milton Keynes. I'm sorry, but we need to build more houses. We're seeing people struggling to pay their energy bills at the moment because energy bills skyrocketed because we were so reliant on foreign oil and gas. I'm sorry, we need to build pylons across this country, making sure that we're connecting above ground, yes,
in Milton Keynes,
wherever is necessary.
Your patch.
There's pylons running across Milton Keynes. They were built a decade ago. And there were really serious arguments and aggressive comments made in planning committee to our local council. They went through and did it. People tell me about how nice the wind turbines look now that they're funding. Right?
They make a noise if you live near them.
We need to make up these arguments. lots of things make noises, but the only way of getting our economy growing, the only way of securing a better future for our kids is
So
going to people.
You've got to sell that on a retail level. So you say to people, yes, you'll have a pylon, but we'll give you some money off your power bills, for example. Make that sale. You might get it through.
In some cases, dealing with those trade-offs and talking about those community benefits as a certain part of it. There's a fund that was set up with the wind turbines that were built in my patch that helps fund community energy projects. Right? There's schemes like that you can certainly do, and we should certainly be looking at. But ultimately, we just need politicians who are willing to front up these arguments, deal with the trade-offs, and I think we've been ignoring too many of these economic trade-offs for many years.
Perhaps
we can't
honesty.
afford to do so more. Yeah, it's
honesty. I
mean,
in a sense, you could argue that the big issues were pushed down the track by the last government. I mean, to see Bridget Phillipson defend an increase in tuition fees after 8 years of being frozen by the Tory party is difficult for the Labour Party, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is.
Those numbers are big at the end of that period, but being paid off by students.
But none of us, we're having to front up lots of difficult arguments at the moment. And I spend quite a lot of time being incredibly envious of my predecessors. You think about the politicians that came in 2010. It wasn't, there was really
austerity
tough. There was really tough financial situation. They had to, after the financial crisis. But public services were doing well. You think about the politicians that came in 1997. Public services were in a really bad state, but the finances of the country were in a good place. We're having to deal with finances that are worse than they were in 2010 and public services that are worse than they were in 1997. And that is really difficult conversation to have with people.
Part of being honest, surely, is also saying why they're in a situation. £400 billion spent on dealing with COVID. 100, I'm going to forget the number on the energy price shock, but let's say it's 100 billion. That's £500 billion spent in the past 5 years that Labour aren't talking about. Politically, I get it, blame the Tory party for that. But why not be honest and say, we are where we are. We are increasing tax to a big chunk of GDP spend, the biggest in 50, 60 years, because in part of these two parallel shocks to the economy.
No, that's an absolutely fair point. The problems,
that's honesty, isn't it?
The issues that this country have faced in the last few years would have been difficult for any government. I believe we needed politicians to be at their best in order to deal with the two crises you just mentioned. I think the Conservative government that served us during that period was very far from being at its best. I think both can be true at the same time, but you're right. We also need to acknowledge that the difficulties we faced in many years are not just because of the Conservatives. I don't think they've made them better. I think they've made them much worse. I think they've made it much more difficult. But any government would be struggling right now.
Austerity being case in point, for example, before the energy shock, you think that austerity made it harder for working families and meant many felt worse off over that period.
And it meant that we just weren't prepared to deal with many of these crises when they came along. I mean, you talk about the energy crisis. We could have been far better prepared as a country to deal with the energy crisis by making sure that we had more energy here made in the UK.
I think that is understood, but I think voters get that. They want more energy security. They wonder why oil and gas licenses have been suspended. They don't understand that because there's black gold in the ground.
But if you look at Nick Clegg in 2012 going, we're not going to build any nuclear power stations because it will take us a few years to get them online. We should have started that process then. You think about David Cameron cutting the green crap. Well, I'll tell you what, that would have had a lot more impact on people's bills because it would have had insulation in people's walls, so their energy bills wouldn't have been so high. He cut that because he didn't think it would help him get through the 2015 election campaign, and it made us more vulnerable when the energy crisis came along. So there were lots of decisions made by the Conservatives that made those crises that we face more difficult. And we need to make sure that, this isn't the end of it. There's more to come. There's more crises to come in the future. This country is living in an increasingly unstable world, but we need to make sure that we are better prepared for it, and we need to make sure that we're getting the economy growing again.
More to come, but no more budgets like last week to come. Just to check on that.
We made hard decisions now, so we have to make fewer hard decisions in the future.
So no more tax rises under Labour for 5 years?
I can't make any promise. I can't make promises.
I
can't make promises on all of the specific measures that we're going to see in future budgets. But we've fronted up the hard decisions now because we know that that's the only way to make sure that this country has a brighter
What
future.
is the Labour Growth Group? I love this idea because for me you're fascinating because there's so many colleagues of you and others who sit in normally Tory seats and sounding a bit like Conservatives when you're Labour, so that's fascinating.
I mean, firstly, growth is always associated with the Conservative Party.
I'm being a bit facetious, but yeah.
No, but it's a fair point. Growth is always associated by the Conservative Party, but actually if you look back through history, economic growth has usually been higher under Labour governments than it has been under Conservative governments. Yeah,
over the past...
the post-war governments, growth has tended to be higher under Labour governments than under Conservative governments for a variety of reasons. And we need that to be true this time as well. Getting growth back into the economy. if the economy in the UK had grown the same as the OECD average over the past decade, we'd have £5,000 more going into the pocket of every household in this country. I'll tell you what, they'd be paying a lot more in tax without us having to raise the tax rates as a consequence. So we'd have all of that more money for our NHS, for our public services, without having to make those difficult decisions last week. So making sure that we don't have another lost decade, make sure we get that growth back into the economy. So there's more money going into people's pay packets, more money going into the Treasury, is the most important.
So what your group's
task.
doing is reaching out to companies and trying to find a bridge to the government. Is that right? Or what are you doing?
Yeah, we're doing that. I mean, firstly, we want to reassure businesses and investors right across the country that this government takes growth seriously, and we as backbenchers are going to have those difficult conversations with our constituents about house building, pylons, all of those things that previous governments have not been willing to do.
Yeah.
But we're also willing to front up many of the arguments, push the government to go further where necessary in order to put pro-growth policies in place so that we can get our economy moving again.
What marks out of 10 would you give your government so far? I mean, the winter fuel allowance was a polling catastrophe, and you're a pollster.
I was a pollster.
You are. You know more about it than I do. You know how it works. I mean, that was a dreadful timing to do it outside when you can't even offer anything in return. Maybe do it in September when you do it at the same time as the state pension going up. Offer something.
Well, look, we haven't offered things in return.
You lost the argument on it, though. I mean, it must be in your postbag now.
I mean, most it comes back to the difficult decisions. I'm willing to front up difficult decisions. I'm not willing to shy away from them because unfortunately, it's what our country needs right now. But look, what I've done and what I think many MPs are doing is ensuring that our constituents don't go cold this winter. All of them, pensioners included. So I've been we've spent money putting out adverts on encouraging people to claim pension credit, because that's actually the biggest cause of pensioner poverty in this country, is people not claiming pension credit. We've got tens of millions of pounds into local authorities in order to support them in helping people with those marginal cases. But actually, the other thing we need to reassure people about is that almost all pensioners in this country will have more money in their pocket this winter than they did last winter. This
winter?
Notwithstanding.
Before the increase next April?
Notwithstanding, yeah, because we had an increase last April. So
under the Tory party?
Well, indeed, but notwithstanding the winter fuel cut, pensioners will find this winter easier
because
than they
of
did
the Tory
last
party,
winter.
not because of Labour.
Because of the triple.
Would you thank the Tory party now?
Because of the triple lock on. Because of the triple lock on pensions. But making these difficult decisions on the winter fuel allowance that we have means that we can carry on supporting the triple lock in pensions into the future.
Is it
worth
the
thing for pensioners?
The political fallout from that? But given the scale of, I mean, the money you're saving is such a small amount compared to the budget last week. I mean, was it? Politically, I wonder whether it was a mistake, because just the scale of the fury with. I'm only responding to the comments we get in our email basket from viewers and listeners.
We can't afford to have a winter fuel allowance that gives money. We can't afford as a country to carry on giving money to the richest pensioners. We just can't do it. No. Now, we can have discussions about how exactly you set up a means-tested scheme, but we need to set up a means-tested scheme, because, I'd love to be able to carry on giving every pensioner in this country £300 every winter. Unfortunately, given the inheritance we've had, that is just not possible. And securing that triple lock on pensions is the most important thing, and this has allowed us to secure that for the next 5 years.
IHT on family farms, £1 million cap, that's going to go up to £10 million, isn't it, before Christmas?
What do you mean? Is it the cap or James?
Yeah, the cap. It must to take these smaller farms that you have in your constituency out of this inheritance tax.
So it's not necessarily £1 million.
Well, it could be three if you add in other things, spouses and the rest of it. But the allowance is £1 million.
Indeed, and most people who, the data from last year showed that almost 3/4 of people will be excluded from this shift. So I think that's really important. Most family farms in this country are not going to be.
That's contested by the NFU, by the way, of course. As you know.
Well, indeed, but the thing that we're trying to deal with here, and it's really important, and it's actually really bad news for family farmers, if nothing else, is that people are using land in Britain as a tax dodge. Yeah. You have people, I'm not going to name names, but
don't name names. But I know you mean. I know they buy up land to then they can then fold their estates.
I'm not going to name names, but there are some people, including many people who have criticised this policy, who have bought up land in Britain in order to minimise their tax liabilities. And that is not good for farming. That is not good for Britain. That is not good.
Or food security.
That's not good for the rest of us, because we pay our taxes, as we damn well should, and then you see other people finding ways of dodging.
Target at those people, not at these multi-generation farmers who are telling us how miserable they are.
And that's why we've set that really quite substantial threshold, which could be up to, as you say, £3 million. And farmers in this country still have the best deal on inheritance tax of almost any.
It's 20% after the million, isn't it? I think from memory,
or up to 3 million,
or up to 3 million,
depending on the situation that you're in. So these are incredibly generous thresholds. Look, there's just with the winter fuel allowance, just with so many of these issues, there is nothing that is perfect. Setting policy is never perfect. You are always going to have people trapped in these difficult policy decisions, and we have to acknowledge that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't start grappling with them, because refusing to grappling with them, refusing to deal with the difficult trade-offs this country faces, will get us into an even worse situation.
If you'd been more honest in July about this trade-offs, which you are bravely taking on now as a party and a government, perhaps it wouldn't be so controversial, but perhaps you may not have won the election. Is that what you'd say back? I don't know. If you'd said, look, we need to get a £40 billion tax increase into September, we're going to have to deal with winter fuel allowance, tuition fees, inheritance tax. If you'd said that to everybody at the beginning...
Yeah, I mean, in fairness,
but why don't you say in July?
Everything we set out in our manifesto was fully funded by tax rises in our manifesto. But we didn't know how bad the situation was. I mean, you could say
$9.5 billion the OBR agrees, not 22.
It's 22 billion when you add in the other bits as well. But it's not just that, right? You take the NHS, for example. We wanted to get more appointments. We had a funded way of doing so. Wes Streeting came into the Department of Health and was told that actually the status quo is cutting appointments by 20,000 a year because the Tories haven't funded the NHS correctly. We need to deal with that. And we didn't know that before the election.
They put a lot of money in the Tories, didn't they?
Yeah, and didn't do the reforms necessary in order to do so. Now,
yeah.
there's a fair criticism of the Labour Party. I think there was a fair criticism of the Labour Party, which is, given everything we've seen over the 14 years, we shouldn't have trusted the Tories. We should have assumed that they were lying to the country, and we should have put plans in place in order to mitigate against that. We made the mistake of trusting the Tories, and I tell you what, Chris, we ain't going to be making that mistake again.
Really? Were they lying? Jeremy Hunt is a liar? Is that right? I mean, I think... I know you political rough and tumble in Parliament, that's where you live, but is he a liar? I mean, was he misleading?
I think the Tories went into last election misleading the British public about the state of the country. And
they would definitely counter that. They were saying it's choices. It's when you have to crystallise a debt. Maybe the infected blood scandal, which is 11 billion quid in last week's budget, maybe that money could have been put over a number of years. And if you bring things forward into the what's owed now, do you know what I mean? I mean, you can look at problems in different ways, can't you? Rather than being a liar. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, okay. You could look at things different ways, or you could look at it as a massive black hole that they left in the economy and refused to grapple with. I mean, the most offensive one is hotel bills. I mean, they racked up these hotels.
We've been banging on about
no, indeed, of course you have.
8 million a day.
We're taking hard-earned taxpayers' money out of their pockets.
It's a disgrace.
It is an absolute disgrace. And using it to pay
a small bit of policy by your and their government is to say you can't come here, but if you do come here, here's the hotel for you.
Yeah, and
that's the invitation to small boats crossing.
We need to be shutting down those hotel bills, but you can't do that with the ridiculous Rwanda gimmick, which actually
you didn't try it out. Though you got rid of it before it started.
Which actually it was never going to start. It was a gimmick.
It
was
may
a joke.
It may have started.
I mean, that's just like the sort of fantasy policy that was never going to work. Nobody thought it was going to work. It was a complete joke.
The Tories thought it was going to work.
They didn't think it was going to work. They said it didn't. Who was it? The Home Secretary and the Home Secretary's advisors were going around saying it wasn't going to work.
Robert Jenrick thought it wouldn't work. James Cleverly thought it would work. Why not try it for a few months? If it didn't work, we can all know it won't work.
We were trying it for months and it carried on not working.
It hasn't got started.
It just isn't going to work.
We're relitigating the last election, which is great fun, but perhaps doesn't help us much.
But focusing on policies that work, focusing on trade-offs, making sure that we prioritise economic growth in the economy, that's what I'm here to do.
Well, I think everyone wants it to work. We all want a growing economy and a better country for all our families. Kerry Badenoch, are you worried about her?
Not particularly.
She's different. She's facing Keir Starmer today on Wednesday. Our readers and listeners will know how it went by Friday.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, I don't think Kemi has started... Look, Keir Starmer became leader of the Labour Party. He changed the Labour Party to make sure that we're focusing on the biggest issues facing the country. We're ready for government again, and we went on to win that election. I don't see anything in what Kemi has been saying during that leadership campaign or what she's done in the first week of the job that really means that she's grappling with why her party faced such a humiliating defeat earlier this year and the steps that she needs to go through to change her party.
Well, they all tell us about trust. I've sat through endless hours of these people, these Tories telling me they want to get people to trust us better.
Yeah.
They know that's the point they've failed on.
Yeah, no, it is. But I don't see a plan coming in place from her in order to make people trust them again. And we still haven't heard a single apology from the Tories for what they did to this country, for the inheritance that they left for us. And if she wanted to start rebuilding trust, the first thing that she should be doing is reckoning with people, being honest with people about what their party did and the steps that she's going to make to change the Conservative Party so that they will never make those mistakes again. And I can't see anything from what she said so far.
She's got 4 years to make a case. 4 years to make a case before leading the party in the next election if she gets that far. Step back though. it's the Tories' fourth female leader, the first black woman. I mean, it's a moment, isn't it? And why can't the Labour Party do any better than having a female chancellor?
No, that's a completely reasonable question. We need to be much better at making sure that we get diverse people right at the top of the Labour
Two
Party.
men speaking, two white men speaking.
Indeed.
Sorry about that.
No, indeed. But look, I'd love to see a female Labour Prime Minister, and I hope that we can in the future.
I do too, actually. Frankly, at some point. You mentioned trust there. Do you worry you're losing trust because, as I said about these shocks in the budget which weren't signposted in July in the manifesto, the trust issue is something which you're now squandering?
Look, we relitigate the arguments about the not knowing the size of the thing, but
yeah.
I think there is a much bigger question here. And I went around and sat in focus groups and ran opinion polls for 10 years. I saw it. Voters are losing trust in us. Voters are losing trust in politicians, in all parties, and not just here in the UK. We talked about Trump. It's exactly the same in the US.
Let's talk about Farage. Let's talk about Farage. I mean, Farage was on the TV this morning talking about Donald Trump, and I mean, he's going to be emboldened by the Trump win in America. He's going to think, I'll have a bit of that in this country. They're looking at 80 or 90. They think they can win 80 or 90 reform MPs at the election. They tell me privately. Now, you might mock that, or well, you're not mocking it. Actually, you're looking quite serious and worried about that. They say that, and it's not beyond the realms, that there could be this disaffection with the main parties at the next election.
There is a disaffection with the main parties. Now, the main antidote to that, and the main reason why I think there is so much disaffection, is because the economy isn't working for ordinary people anymore. People haven't seen more money go into their pay packets for 14 years. The main antidote to that is people like me making sure that we are fronting up these arguments, dealing with the difficult trade-offs, doing what is necessary in order to make sure that it's working for normal people again. And it hasn't done for a long time. And it's the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning. It's the last thing I think about when I go to bed at night. Not just for my re-election chances, but for the future of this country, for the next generation, making sure that we can give them that brighter future. And people are losing faith in that vision, in that light at the end of the tunnel, in the fact that there are Britain's brightest days are ahead of us.
And we not need to
just sell that vision that our country's brightest days are ahead of us, but we need to do the hard work necessary in order to achieve it.
Milton Keynes North was a Tory MP forever, is that right? Until you came along?
Well, so there was boundary changes have shifted around a bit, but yeah, we've usually had Tory MPs up in Milton Keynes, which is a shame. I'm the first MP for Milton Keynes that was born there and grew up there. So
good for you. Oh, it's marvellous. You're 30 years old. I mean, what made you want to be the Labour MP and then ditch polling?
I'd say, well, I genuinely am really passionate about the Keir Starmer project. Seeing him go through that process of changing the Labour Party and setting out a vision for how we were going to change the country. It's very much my politics, and I really wanted to be involved in it. And I'm not a backseat driver.
No, you're not. That's why you're here.
Well, I wanted to get involved. I felt like Milton Keynes, my home, had been let down by Tory MPs and Tory governments, and I wanted to go out there and be involved in the change and making sure that we're fixing some of these massive problems our country is facing, and making sure we've got that brighter future. And it's the easiest thing in the world. I think people don't quite understand. It's the easiest thing in the world, to sit on your sofa and get on with the rest of your life. It's a really hard decision to think, I'm actually going to stand and I'm actually going to front this up. But
I think hats off to you, by the way, Chris Curtis. I think we need more people like you want to get involved, get their hands dirty and fight for their communities. I mean, of course, you're a former head of polling. What was it? Was it opinion research?
Yeah.
Are you helping the party with polling now, advising on what people really think?
Not particularly. This is a full-time job, and I'm determined to focus as much as I can on this. So I still have some conversations from time to time about, where I think the public are on the most important issues and how we should be communicating and talking to people. But I'm spending as much time as I can making sure I'm serving the voters of Milton Keynes North.
I'm just looking forward into the next election. I mean, do you worry about the shallow nature of your majority? The fact that 1 in 3 voters voted for you, 1 in 5 people who could vote voted for Labour. Is that a worry? It's not the same as 97. I mean, the Tories cling on to that fact as a way to overturn you.
I think the worst politicians are the ones that constantly obsess about how they're going to win re-election, and the best politicians are the ones that constantly obsess about how they're going to make their constituents' lives better. And I tell you what, if you focus on the latter rather than the former, you're much more likely to get re-elected as a consequence.
Look, Chris Curtis, it's great to have you joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast in our bunker here in Westminster. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And you're exhausted, you're tired, and I've given you a bit of a grilling, but I really appreciate it. I do tweet at Christopher Hope on X. What's your Twitter account?
I'm not on Twitter anymore.
You're off it?
I'm off Twitter, yeah.
To avoid all the grief?
I just don't think it's a effective use of my time more than anything else.
But people are on there who vote for you, don't they? I mean,
there's a lot more people on other social media networks, Facebook being the most common example in my constituency, and that's the way I try and communicate with people.
Good for you. Well, email me if you want, chopper@gbnews.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to help other people find it. Thanks to the great team of GB News colleagues behind this podcast, Mick Booker, Jeff Marsh, Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan, who produce it. And most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. If you want more Chopper in your life, and Chris Curtis certainly does, catch me during the week on GB News when Parliament sits at midday for PMQs Live, and popping up with political news and analysis throughout the day and in fact the night on GB News whenever I can do it. And keep up to date with our best political reporting on our website, gbnews.com. But for me and Chris, cheerio!